So leaders in the world face a dizzying array of health challenges. And if you read the media each day, you add new threats with each passing moment. So how do we make sense of what's coming? How do we make sense of what governments around the world should prioritize? So 3 years ago, I started with Natalia Kanem, then the head of the United Nations Fund for Population Activities,
Fondo de Actividad de Poblaciones en la ONU, una comisión global dedicada a observar ampliamente
around threats in the world to help provide some prioritization, some information on what's actually the big problems that we face in the world. And to do that in as rigorous a way as humanly possible, and then use that analysis of what are the big problems that we face to help prioritize action for governments. Now, one of the members of our Global Commission is here based in Chile, your Minister of Health, Jimena Aguilera. So we had quite a diverse set of expertise, and I'm going to give you a sneak peek preview of what are the results from this analysis. So we started with a question, which is pretty hard to answer. You know, what will happen to health in the future? And of course, no one actually knows. But what we can do is use statistical models to say, if things continue changing as they have been, what will happen to human health by country around the world? And then, even more important question, how will some of the challenges that might emerge, whether it's climate change or nuclear war or conflict, change the trajectory of human health? Now, to do this, we leverage a very powerful tool, which is the Global Burden of Disease study. This is a study that's been running for 33 years and provides a systematic, standardized assessment of health problems around the world. It's a large collaboration. There are 18,000 collaborators that participate in the Global Burden of Disease. But what it provides us is a curated set of data on every major disease and injury and nearly 100 risk factors, which are the ultimate drivers of health as we go into the future. Now, if you step back for a second, underlying the trends that we see in the past in health and the trends that we expect to see in the future are some core social and economic determinants. Probably the most powerful is poverty. So if we look at this analysis of the number of people living in absolute poverty in the world, which is less than $3 a day per person. We've lived through a period from 1980 to now, the dashed vertical line, where the number in absolute poverty has dropped profoundly. And that number dropped from almost 2 billion in 1980 down to about 800 million today. But the bad news around absolute poverty is that because absolute poverty rates are much, much higher in sub-Saharan Africa, and population growth is much greater in sub-Saharan Africa, we actually are entering many decades where the number of people in absolute poverty are going to actually go up, not down. So we've lived through a great period of progress. We're entering a period of either increasing poverty or worse stagnation. And the same analysis around education, which I'm not showing, is a little bit more optimistic. We expect educational attainment, the other great driver of health, to continue improving around the world. Now, education matters a lot because when societies get educated, women tend to participate in the labor force more, and they end up having fewer children. And that's the big driver of fertility and population growth, and you know that here in Chile because your birth rate is now really very low because you have high educational attainment. When we translate that into people in the world, our estimates from the analysis at the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, the ones we're using in the Commission on 21st Century Global Threats, says that world population will peak in the 2060s. We will peak at about 9.5 billion people, and then population will go down. Some countries like China, population is already declining. So there's been rapid demographic transitions in East Asia, Southeast Asia, of course, many countries in Europe, so that population's already declining. Put this all together, world population peaks and then goes down. This matters a lot for when we think about threats like climate change. It's really driven by the numbers of people. Now, if we run these statistical models, we say what's going to happen to climate, to tobacco, to obesity, long list of drivers, poverty, education, we actually end up with surprisingly good news, which is that life expectancy, shown here by large regions, will continue to increase. We've lived through this period over the last 70 years of great improvement, and we expect, on average, if things keep going, that improvement will continue. So despite the sort of pessimism that we see in the world in many countries, worries about some of the threats like war, climate, we actually, on average, expect things to get better. But if you look at these plots carefully, even though everybody should get better, the disparities, particularly high-income countries versus sub-Saharan Africa, will remain really quite large. So there's a lot we can and should do to have greater progress, protect against the threats that I'm going to talk about, and try to reduce disparities. Now, we run these models into the future, and we can ask the question, which the Commission did nearly 2.5 years ago, what are the big diseases of the future? And this square pie chart, it's called a tree map, shows the loss of health in the future proportionate to the contribution of each disease. All the blue boxes are the non-communicable diseases, heart disease, cancer, diabetes. The red boxes are the infectious diseases, and the green boxes are injuries. The future, globally, is dominated by non-communicable disease, and the bottom left boxes, stroke and ischemic heart disease, the famous cardiovascular diseases, are very important. But the biggest single disease in the future will be diabetes, but there's a big contribution from mental health in the middle. The bottom right of the blue boxes are all the different cancers. We have contributions from Alzheimer's or dementia that you can see. So the future is quite a diverse set of things that both kill you, but things that also cause disability, such as low back pain up on the top left. And because of the population growth in sub-Saharan Africa, things like malaria, lower respiratory infections, diseases truly of poverty remain important, even as we look to the end of the century. So as a group of commissioners, we looked at all this data, we looked at all the risk factor data, and we said, what amongst the 500 diseases and injuries and other issues that the public is discussing are really the big contributors to future threats? And we boiled down from 500 to 16 for the next stage of the analysis, which is trying to figure out what can we do about these conditions. So we end up with 16 global threats. And you can see them on the list here, and I will break them down into what are the really big ones based on our analysis, and what are the next tier down. But bear in mind that all the threats that get into our analysis are large. Each of them had to meet a threshold of causing 1 billion years of life, healthy life lost, which if you want to put that in sort of common understanding, is 2 COVID epidemics. So everything on this list ends up to be large, but some are much larger than others. Now, as a group, we didn't want to just say what's going to get bigger in the future. So, for example, people came to us and said, well, what about asteroid strikes or meteors? There's a small, very small risk of a major asteroid strike, and that could be catastrophic for humanity. But the second criteria we used for thinking about threats was, what can we do about it? What's amenable to action given our current knowledge and science? And so we developed a formal method for assessing amenability. And this graph just gives you an idea of the type of analysis, which is really quite detailed and rigorous. Namely, we tried to use past experience across countries to say, what's the worst that could happen for a particular threat, and what's the best? So the future could be worse because we haven't figured something that's unexpected. It could be better because of some technological or scientific breakthrough. But this range from best to worst gives us a sense of how amenable each of the 16 threats that we've analyzed are to action, policy change, and the future directions. Now, when we did that analysis, we ended up with, even though they're all large, with some that were much bigger than others, and we ended up with 2 that could actually lead to the end of the human species, extinction risk. So our top threats, tier 1 threats amongst our 16, are an interesting mix. By the way, not what we expected as a group of commissioners when we started. So number 1 in terms of magnitude on this list is obesity. It is going up everywhere. It has really diverse consequences, not just on diabetes and heart disease, but on cancers, on musculoskeletal disorders, a real diverse set of outcomes. But next on our list in tier 1 was continued income inequality, because we can show empirically that at any given level of income, some countries have more income inequality and others have less. And if we could get those with more income inequality down to the lower level for their level of income per capita, the health gains would be really large. Same for education. Education is such a driver of health. If we can raise educational attainment, we will have huge effects on future health. And then we added to this top tier of obesity, income inequality, and low education of threats 2 that can cause extinction. Malicious use of AI. Think of AI mostly being used by bad actors to make a very lethal pathogen, but perhaps also the risk of loss of control. And nuclear war that's large enough to lead to nuclear, what's called either winter or famine, where you have a big enough nuclear exchange, you put enough particulates into the atmosphere, you cool the Earth for a prolonged period, and you cause mass starvation. So those are our top tier. The second tier of threats were a group of threats that on our list, all large, but were smaller than that top tier, and they span a wide range of threats that people are concerned about. Climate change, air pollution, pandemics, and AMR on the environment and security front, high alcohol use and tobacco, the rising levels of poor mental health, and it's a whole separate debate about what are the drivers. Is it social media? Is it despair? Is it an interaction about opportunities for the future? But we see it in the data. Mental health is getting worse. And then a diverse set of other issues. For example, the decline globally of development assistance from rich countries to poor countries. This has real effects. And if it continues and development assistance goes away, that's a real threat. If we can learn the lessons of some societies aging in a more healthy way than others, that has potentially huge benefits. Reducing child malnutrition, also large benefits. And then, although we talk a lot about nuclear war, we end up recognizing that Conventional war, what we're seeing in some countries in Africa and in the Middle East today, in Ukraine, can actually be very lethal and is a serious threat. So a diverse set of threats, and governments really need to not just think about conflict, climate, and pandemics, they need to think broadly about this large array of challenges. Now, the results are country by country, and eventually when we release our results, you'll be able to see a list of threats for Chile or for South America or for any group of countries you're interested in. But we end up with 3 action-oriented recommendations from this work. First, science is changing, our understanding of threats is changing. We need to keep reevaluating what we actually know about future threats. Many groups have come to us and asked about what about the threat of mirror life, which is published about a year ago in Science. This could be catastrophic, but we felt like there wasn't yet enough science for us to include that in our analysis. But because the science will change, which is the great powerful thing about ongoing scientific work, we will need to keep this exercise up to date. So we will launch in the fall something we'll call the Monitor of 21st Century Global Threats, so that on a regular basis we can report to governments, heads of state, heads of government, what are the most important for your country or your region. Secondly, for a number of threats, we need innovation. Science and innovation can provide new tools that will make some threats that we have made no progress on. Think obesity. Now we have GLP-1s, which may be part of the solution. And think of that sort of innovation on many of the threats, whether it's antimicrobial resistance or climate. Innovation can really change the equation and mean the progress against that threat could be better, or in our language, what's amenable to action could get much larger through innovation. And the last, and probably the most important recommendation, is that health systems, governments, but particularly ministries of health and health systems, need to think about being threat ready. Not just prepared for pandemics, which has great currency because of COVID, but looking at the diverse set of threats that governments face, everything from socioeconomic inequalities all the way through to conflict or to obesity. Having a dedicated resource within government whose job it is to anticipate, prepare, and help society be ready to take on these threats, so that that trajectory I showed you of rising life expectancy, improving healthy life expectancy, can be even better than what we expect on average, and avoid what could be a much worse set of outcomes. So thank you very much.